This happened about 10 years ago when I was living in a not so great neighborhood, in a not so great 1920s style house. The house, despite being pretty run down, had a really neat design. It had a huge front porch that was screened in and large picture windows on all sides. The front of the house faced the main road through a pretty rough neighborhood, which meant some interesting scenes went down right outside our front door, such as high-speed police chases. During that year or so that we lived on that street, there was a homeless man that would walk down the sidewalk in front of our house. He was almost 6 feet tall, with a head full of dreadlocks, and wore a large trench coat, even though we were in Florida. He would slowly pass the front of our house every few days, dragging a large plastic outdoor trash can, usually muttering something to himself. He never really bothered me or made me uneasy, as I have a soft spot in my heart for the homeless. I was off work one day, home alone, waiting for my boyfriend to get home. It was still early in the evening and daylight outside, so I had the blinds up and some of the windows open. I was on the computer in the living room when I heard the man outside dragging the trash can, talking to himself. By this time we were so familiar with the sounds of the man that I didn't even go to the window to look. It goes away from my mind and an hour passes by, when I randomly noticed that I never actually heard him pass our house. As I mentioned, I became very familiar with the sounds of him walking past our house, so when I realized I hadn't heard him go from one side to the other, I got goosebumps all over my entire body. Because of my severe anxiety, I basically froze in the chair at this point. I know that the front blinds are always closed because we usually have a bong on the table, so I cannot tell if there's anyone in the front yard without getting up out of my seat. I slowly stand up and approach the door, look through the peephole, and to my horror, the man was staring right back at me. He had been standing there staring for an hour. I know that because as soon as he noticed my shadow obscure the peephole, he started pounding the door, pulling at the handle, and screaming nonsense at me. I completely panicked. I had no idea what this man was capable of. But as a survivor of sexual assault, I tend to immediately fear the worst. As he continued to pound on the door and yell, I ran to the bedroom and got our gun. Back in the living room, gun loaded, pointed at the door, I scream at him to go away. He continues without a pause, as if he didn't hear me. I repeat myself and add that I have a gun. Literally no change. Finally, I screamed that the gun is loaded. I was terrified, and I would shoot through the door if he did not leave. After this, silence. I was too scared to check the peephole after our face-to-face encounter, so I called 911 and begged them to hurry. They caught up to the guy at the end of the road and drove me down to identify him. The cops were complete jerks. Apparently they knew this guy, and he was a regular trespasser at local businesses. I explained the story in detail to the police officers. I was visibly shaken up and crying. I explained that I almost shot the man and probably would have killed him. They tell me he's harmless and I'm overreacting. Maybe I was overreacting, but I'm not sorry. Would I have been absolutely heartbroken if I hurt this man, who was obviously not in the right mind? 100%. Would I have regretted not acting this way if he had gotten through my door? Most likely. Either way, let's not meet again, trash can guy. I was maybe around 13 or 14 years old at the time, and I was recently granted the privilege of staying home alone. Every now and then when I was home alone, I'd hear sounds coming from upstairs, so I would instinctively call my mom. She then told me she used to hear things in her old house all the time, and how it's just the house settling in. Fast forward to many instances of the sound later. I decided the very next time I was going to be home alone, I was going to be completely silent and make as little noise as possible. Within the first half an hour, there was nothing, not a peep out of the entire house. I eventually got bored and felt safe, so I went to go grab the TV remote to watch some TV. But a few seconds before I grabbed the remote, I heard a loud crash upstairs and running footsteps. I was sure more than ever that someone was in the house. By now there were plenty of consistent sounds coming from upstairs, that it was a fact that someone was upstairs. 14-year-old me decided to hatch a quick plan. Being the skinny, most non-threatening little girl I was, I first grabbed a knife from the kitchen. Then I grabbed a shoe and propped the front door open. After a few moments and some deep breaths, I yelled out in the deepest voice I could, "I know you're upstairs. I am giving you a chance to leave without me calling the police, but I have propped the front door open and I'll be in the bathroom. Be aware that I am holding a knife, and if you refuse to leave, I will call the police." Sure enough, I walked into the bathroom with a knife, absolutely scared to death that someone will open the door. I wait and wait until the one sound to this day that will always scare me for this reason. I heard the front door close and the shoe was moved. I quickly locked the door and turned the alarm system on. I hope to never see this person or hear this person again. This happened a few years back. I was about 14 years old and my parents were out, and had left me with my little sister, who was 10 at the time, home alone. It was about 10 or 11 p.m. when the lights go out. This used to happen sometimes in my country, since it's a new country and is really poor. But that time I noticed something was out of the ordinary. Only the lights in our house were out, and our neighbors' lights were on. I had a bad feeling, so I quickly locked the doors and closed the blinds. I told my little sister to hide behind the couch and not to get out, no matter what happened. I hid somewhere else with a knife, tried to call my mom, but she didn't pick up, so I waited. I thought it was over, so I got out of my hiding place and headed to the kitchen, where we had a back door, to look out the window. Before I get close, I hear the doorknob turning. It doesn't work, so the person on the other side tries again, now violently. This is where I panic and shouted out, "Who the fuck are you? Fuck off my house. I have called the police." I hear footsteps and then nothing. I went to the other room and looked out the window, and I saw someone running out of my backyard. My sister was crying, so I comforted her. We still stayed hidden until my parents came home about an hour after. We told them everything, and my dad said whoever it was, he had initially cut the house electricity to scare us. To this day, every time the electricity goes out, I kind of get scared, and I'm glad we're okay. When I was 14, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. I lived in a small village and spent most of the days on my own, watching TV and playing Sims while my parents worked. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, where I liked to sit in the living room, the chair was located right next to the window anyway, so I could always see people on the street, and they could see me too. One day I sat watching daytime TV when I noticed a man walking down our street. Our street is a dead end, so I normally recognize everyone who walks down, but I certainly have never seen this man before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper with the hood up and the sleeves rolled up, revealing tattoos on his arms, carrying a large duffel bag and looking closely at each house as he passed. As I sat watching him, I was in full view of him too. He started to pass our house, and when he saw me, he smiled and turned to come up our short driveway. He came up to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer the door to someone I didn't know, but he had seen me, and I'm 14 and was afraid to be rude to an adult, so I obediently went to open the door just a crack. I peeked around the door and said hello. As he spoke, he pulled the duffel bag around his body, asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I thought he would probably leave if I said no, but instead he stepped towards the door and unzipped the bag. "Well, the thing is, I just got out of prison, and I wanted to do the right thing, you know. It's hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things." He started pulling towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk out of his bag. The word prison made my heart sink, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money and closed the door. He stood on the step for a minute, still talking to me about being able to help. So I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he did. I soon settled back down watching TV and forgot all about the encounter. At 5 p.m. my parents came home and took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later there was a knock at the door. I came onto the landing and peered down as my mom answered. 2 police officers stood on the step. They asked if anyone had came to our house that day. My mom said no one had, and that was when I remembered my visitor from earlier. I came downstairs and said actually someone had came by. Seeing that I was young, the 2 police officers asked to come inside and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man and the conversation I had with him. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to be honest about what happened. Once I had told them what happened, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and they thanked me and left. I asked my parents what was going on. My mom explained to me that a few minutes after the guy had came to our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently he let himself into the house and walked upstairs. When he found her in the shower, he sexually assaulted her. With my description and the evidence from the girl, they tracked the guy down. It turned out that he had just been released from prison on a similar attack on another girl. I never answer the door when I'm alone now, and I also won't shower when I'm home alone. This story comes from my father, born near Toronto, who grew up on a farm with his younger brother and his older sister. So this happened in 1969, while my dad was 8 or 9. One night, both parents were out of the house, along with his brother. They left him and his sister home alone. Eventually the phone rings and my father picks up with a standard Canadian politeness. "Hello, this is Bob." The person calling said they were coming to kill both my father and his sister, and told them to leave the house. My father, slightly spooked, uses the intercom system to page his sister, telling her what happened. At this time, both children could drive, as they'd been doing so on the farm, so leaving the house wasn't too much of a problem. While packing up some things to leave, the phone rings again, and my father answers it. "Hello, this is Bob." The voice says, "Why haven't you left yet? I'm coming to kill you." With which my father replies, "Well, I'm trying to leave, but you keep fucking calling. I can't leave when I have to keep on answering the phone now, can I?" The voice hangs up and my father and sister drive to where their parents are having dinner. Nothing else happened with that voice. It was probably just a prank of some sort, and it didn't really faze my dad. But I thought you guys would enjoy this tale from Canada.